Hello everybody, it's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by composer Tom Howe. Over the course of his career, Tom has worked on more than 70 Emmy and BAFTA winning dramas and documentaries. Besides scoring for TV and film, Tom has written multiple international hit songs as well. For one of his most recent projects, Early Man, which he co-composed with Harry Gregson-Williams, both he and Harry received an Annie Award nomination for Outstanding Achievement for Music in an Animated Feature Production. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. Before we dive right into Early Man, for which you and Harry have been nominated for the Annie Awards, I would like to know more about your musical career and how it all began.
Sure. Well, I sort of was into music from a young age because my parents were both musical. So my father plays the organ in church, and my sister was played flute and cello, and I sung in the choir from probably about the age of 7 or something. And I started playing the piano even before that. So I was sent away to boarding school in England, which is was and probably still is very common. But that was we would do a lot of singing then, and a lot of music in general. And then I took up the guitar when I was about 10, and later on the clarinet, and just became familiar with those different sort of instruments, but then also how that could, cross a lot of different genres in terms of, piano and being more kind of film classical, and then guitar, I got heavily into kind of, rock and pop and all the old kind of greats in that area. And then later on I studied orchestration and sort of, I initially went off on doing a career in a kind of adverts, really doing music for ads. And then I was doing a lot of session work. So then I ended up being in bands and writing a lot of songs. And then I came sort of full circle really back to more classical sort of film music.
As I understand, you play multiple instruments as well. And when you compose music or prepare a mock-up, do you always mock up every instrument, or do you also incorporate several live instruments to boot?
I try and incorporate live stuff as well. I think it makes the demos sound a bit more, have a bit more life. And I'm actually working on something at the moment as well, which is all kind of guitars and bass and drums. And so for that, I'm playing the guitars and the bass and sort of shakers and various bits of percussion. And you sort of end up, if you do a good take and it has a lot of energy, you can end up with something that sounds, you just need less parts basically. So I find sometimes with the MIDI, you need to layer a lot of things to kind of get it to sound good. But it's a bit of both really.
And you have many credits. You scored documentaries, you scored TV series, and also films. But you also wrote multiple hit songs. Which artists have you worked with so far?
Well, I worked back in England when I was living there. I worked with, it was around the time that Pop Idol and X Factor were the first kind of becoming, a big kind of phenomenon. And I used to go on these songwriting retreats to Sweden 4 times a year. And you do these sort of writing boot camps and work with different artists. And I'd work with a lot of people who kind of went through those shows. So people like Will Young and Darius Dinesh, and then later on, like Jessie J was another one who was on one of these trips. So I worked with her, and but a whole range of different people. I did the single for the X Factor winner from Sweden, and various different things like that really. And then I sort of took some of those ideas forward into when I started doing TV early on in the UK. The music was very diverse. So one minute I'd be doing something that was very sort of twee English sounding, and then the next minute I'd do something like The Face, which was like a modelling program where all the music had to be kind of like pop songs, So it was quite a useful experience, really, and a lot of fun as well.
Did you write, a couple of songs, or primarily a song or two for their albums, or did you also produce entire records with those guys?
I would produce stuff as well, so I would do. I would produce the tracks too, and actually, funny enough, I've just produced a track here for the new Lego 2 movie. So that's a different. I didn't write it, but I've along with a friend called Rance from 1500 or Nothing. He's a top songwriter who's actually nominated for 3 Grammys coming up. But he and I have produced a song for the new movie. So I do. I still do dabble in that world a bit too.
Tom, in terms of craftsmanship and also music production, what do you think are the biggest differences between writing songs and producing a hit album and film scoring?
Well, I think that the film scoring, I think, is more about, with the films that I've been doing anyway, more about having, finding the essence of a character and having maybe a sort of tune or motive for that character that you build throughout the movie, and try and kind of get that into people's, so that hopefully it becomes memorable and they associate it with the character, and you're kind of playing different emotions with that, so you can have a version of the theme that's very happy, one that's sad, one that's, a comedy thing or what have you. I think songs, particularly nowadays, have become very production-led. And obviously with the film scores, if we're lucky enough to go off and record at Abbey Road or Ayr or wherever it may be, you're getting a very high production quality. But it's not necessarily always treated music in terms of the production side of things. Now, obviously, there's big exceptions to that, like the current Spider-Verse movie that Dan Pemberton's done, where that is rare, and so that's not always the case. But that's been in songwriting generally, the kind of songs that aren't artist-driven, as in sort of singer-songwriter or where that can be quite organic sounding. If you're looking to kind of collaborate with artists, generally, it's pretty production-led. I don't think you don't tend to kind of go and write a song for a songwriter. They tend to be able to be doing that themselves, as with a lot of the other records, we'll have multiple writers and producers on one track.
Do you wish to continue also writing songs, or do you want to focus on film and TV scoring in the future?
Well, I am really focusing on TV and film. I've done less and less songs, and that's I'm more interested in film and TV and telling a story than I am. I like to have a longer to sell my idea than just a 3-4 minute track. But I like, both areas interest me. It's all music, and I like. Songwriting is often much more of a collaboration as well. You will work with people actually in the same room all the time. As with film scoring, even if you're on a movie with somebody else or you're helping somebody on something or however it is, you're still often very much on your own. And the feedback is done post when you've written something. As with songwriting is often, 2 or 3 people in a room, or sometimes more these days, coming up with ideas together. So that can be a lot of fun. So the answer really is I'm pushing TV and film, but if an opportunity came up that was a good one, I'd be happy to, be involved in that too.
Tom had written a very nice score for Professor Marston and the Wonder Woman. Do you feel that this score helped you in some way to boost your career as a film composer or to become a more accomplished composer?
Yeah, I had a great time on that project. The director, Angela Robinson, was absolutely brilliant, and she would come down to my studio on a very regular basis and just be in the room whilst I was working, so I could get kind of instant feedback as I was going. And it was a challenging film because there was a lot of space and there wasn't really anything to hide behind. So you had to I mean, I find if you've got a sort of big action sequence or something like that, obviously it's probably going to be a lot of notes, but there's also at the same time quite a lot of things you can hide behind. But when you get a long scene where there's nothing's really going on and there's not a lot of kind of Foley behind it or sound effects, I think those for me are always the biggest challenge. And that film had a lot of that, and trying to find the right tone to sell the emotion but not oversell it, and was tough. And but I was really pleased with how it turned out, and I thought the film turned out brilliantly, and I was really pleased to be part of it.
Okay, let's dive right into Early Man. Could you tell our listeners a bit more about the concept of this animated comedy Early Man, and how you and Harry ended up working and scoring it?
Yeah, so the Early Man is really a story about an underdog who ends up sort of gaining the respect of his peers and leading them to be the winners of a soccer match. And along the way, he kind of gets a girlfriend and wins the respect of the kind of chief of the tribe. So the whole thing is set in kind of prehistoric time. And Doug, the lead character, and his trusty companion Hognob, they're kind of like a double act. And the Bronze Age turn up and sort of take over the home of the cave people. And they end up challenging them to a soccer match. But they've never played soccer before. And so the whole thing then revolves around them learning this game and finding out their ancestors played it before there's a big showdown in the final act, and Doug ends going home with the girl, the trophy, and the respect of all his peers. So it's a very heartfelt movie, and had a great time on it. And that happened, really, it came about where Harry and I had been doing something else. I've been helping him on something else, and I can't remember now what it was. And he called me up and said, this movie's come in, and he'd worked for Aardman, I think, 4 times before that. So Chicken Run, Arthur Christmas, and
Yes.
Away. And he said, I haven't got time to do the whole thing, but would you like to do it together? I obviously said yes, I'd be delighted. And I'm a huge fan of Nick Park and all the things that he'd done before. I mean, Chicken Run, Wallace and Gromit and all those things. And so I then got on a plane to Bristol and in England, and I went to meet the team at Aardman, and obviously got on well with Nick for him to be comfortable with me and Harry doing it together. And then I flew back here. We didn't have a lot of time, and so I flew back here, and Harry and I would meet like every morning and kind of talk about what we were going to work on, and try and get our initially get the themes together, and then we would meet for playbacks each week and feedback from the director. And but Harry and I would actually pass, and I really enjoyed this part, pass actually cues back and forth as well. So there's a couple of cues in the movie where sequences were started, in Cubase and Logic or what have you, and then passed on to the other person, who then would add another minute, and then it came back, and then it would go like that. So that was a very nice way to work, because obviously Harry's, one of the greatest in getting his, take on things, and then seeing how he would develop something or send me something to develop or whatever. It was a really great sort of informative process, and I had a great time the whole way through. And then we got to London, to Abbey Road, and we had 8 days there recording, and it was all great fun, really, and everyone at Aardman was really supportive and helpful, and there were 7 Annie Awards it's got for the movie, so obviously it all turned out well, and everyone did a good job, so it was a great thing to be part of.
You basically started writing a piece of music and Harry would add another minute, and also vice versa, basically. So,
Yeah.
but was it also a split score that certain sections were your responsibility and other sections were entirely Harry's?
Yes. So we both went away and wrote tunes, themes for characters, and then we would take those and use them in different places. So certain cues, Harry would do, and then certain cues I would do, and then we would feed back on each other's cues, and along with our music editor Jack Dolman, who was on board too, and he's another great voice of. You can trust him, you know what I mean, in terms of if he doesn't like it, he tells you he doesn't like it. So you know that when he says it's good, or that it's good to play for Nick, or and the rest of the team at Arden. But Harry was the sort of obviously the leading force, and had he would send cues over and say, what do you think of this, and I would do the same, vice versa. And then some of them were split cues entirely, as I said, where we would write certain things, and then somebody would, either he or I would take it and add to that, and then send it back, and so on and so forth.
If I'm correct, you had worked with Harry briefly on Ridley Scott's film Exodus.
Yeah.
And you had collaborated with him on Monkey Kingdom.
That's right, yeah. So in those instances, I was doing additional music and or additional arrangements or what have you. And that was really how because I came to Hollywood 5 years ago nearly, and that was Exodus was the first thing that I sort of worked on here really. And although he and I did something before that, a little short film together, which I did whilst I was in England and he was here. We did a co-write on that, but yeah, Exodus was the first thing here, and those were an additional composer capacity, additional arrangements.
How did your work relationship with Harry evolve? I mean, starting from Exodus to Monkey Kingdom and now to Early Man.
I think just being around. I mean, those scores, Exodus, Monkey Kingdom, those are very much Harry's scores, and my contribution is obviously as a very minimal input. But we went on and did a couple of other things together, which but I always, when I first got here, he was really the only person I knew here, and he was terribly kind and helpful, and still is to this day, but not just with music, but it just in terms of helping me kind of get set up in where to live, and where intros to people, and I ended up doing a film for a director. It was a straight to DVD Sony movie called Lost and Found, but I met the director at a drinks thing at Harry's, and I did a movie called Charming, which actually comes out in England in April, but Harry score produced that, and I was the composer. And so somebody as busy as him is getting a lot of offers for things, and he was generous enough to pass some of those over to me, and when I then hopefully didn't sort of mess it up, he then took me forward onto the next thing, and Early Man came up, and I think being it's a very sort of British sort of institution, or the Nick Park, Nick. I mean, John and Harry obviously did Chicken Run together, and then John's English, and then Harry's done subsequent ones after that. But I think being able to kind of relate to the English humour in terms of working with Aardman was a help on that. But really, it came just from being friends with Harry, and him trusting me, and knowing that I wasn't hopefully gonna screw it up, but was gonna be able to pull my share, my half along, and get the result that he needed, and that we all needed.
Was Early Man conceived as an orchestral score right off the bat, or did you at first have the idea to also throw in some electronic elements? We didn't. Electronics didn't really. I mean, we tried all kinds of things at the beginning, in terms of experimenting with sounds. So we were doing sort of. I mean, I went out and bought a load of. Just things like rocks and stuff, which I tried to kind of record and make samples of for percussion ideas and things like that.
but it's amazing how little that actually worked, But there were all kinds of ideas we had to make a sort of sonic palette that could have kind of caveman sort of sounds about it, and yet help be amongst the sit well with kind of melodies and things. And we tried all kinds of instruments, but we didn't really ever go electronic with it. We thought it should be fairly organic sounding from the start, really.
Do you actually remember which cues of the score you wrote on your own, or which parts of the film you scored all by yourself?
Yeah, well, I can remember some. As I said, some of them got diluted, but I know, for instance, I can give you two straight off the bat. There's the opening arrival of the Bronze People at the beginning of the movie. That was one I wrote, and then I remember the Badlands Duck, which is a great cue on the sound. That's all Harry, And then, for instance, Harry did the cue straight after the. It's when the duck comes into land. It sounds like Dam Busters. It's
yeah.
That's a really good cue. So Harry did that, and then I did, and then the cue after that was called The Match Commences, and that one was one we passed back and forth. And then the cue after that, Hognob in Goal, was one that I did. So there's a whole, sort of spectrum across the score of different things, but it wasn't really, either one of us could have had a go at something, but it just sort of, it was more, as I said, the process of doing it was one of the most enjoyable I've ever had, in terms of we would meet and speak, and it wasn't like anybody particularly said, well, I need to, Harry say, I want to do this one, or I do. It just sort of happened that we were kind of making our way through it, and then I had a go at the kind of duck cue last night, and then I'd say, well, it sounds great, let's play that to Nick, and vice versa. So it was really good fun.
Projects of this kind are usually conceptualized and also realized over many years. Did you have lots of time to work on the music, or did you have to write quickly?
We didn't have a lot of time. We because they'd already booked the orchestra, and they had the dates fixed at Abbey Road, which they had to keep in order to make their dub, in order to make their release. I mean, they were literally had to get the print ready beginning of January, because it was being released at the end of January, and so I think when we started, I think it was the end of August or early September, and we were scoring in November, like end of November. So we didn't have we spent probably a week or two tearing our hair out and trying to come up with some kind of concept for not just themes, but as I said, as a palette of sounds. But once we actually had the tunes, of which we had about 4 or 5 different themes for various characters, so one for Doug, one for the tribe, one for Nuth, who was the villain, and then there's one for the Queen. Once we had those, then it was just a question of knuckling down and trying to kind of work our way through the rest of the score. But it wasn't like we had the luxury of sitting with something for 3 weeks and then changing our minds. It wasn't that kind of experience. It had to be done. But sometimes I think that can be, interesting enough, I'm working on something at the moment where they've got a screening in January, and I'm meant to be scoring in April. And it's suddenly, having had weeks and weeks of not being able to kind of make any decisions on not just music, but on, effects and length of shots and various things. Suddenly, within 10 days, the whole thing is put together and done, because it has to be. And I think sometimes having a hard deadline doesn't half help to motivate you. I think when you've got sort of 6 months to write a score, you probably procrastinate for 4 months, and then you write it in 2. And so we didn't really. The lack of time, I think, actually can be helpful as well, because you can work 7 days a week, 18 hours a day, and you can achieve quite a lot in that time. But it kind of forces you to make decisions, and sometimes you're going to get that wrong, and then Harry might comment and say, well, I don't think that's quite right, or Nick Park might comment on something that we both liked, and he said, I don't think that's right at all. But you at least commit to something because you have to, and then you can if it works and it's good, you can move forward with that and take things, move the score along and hopefully get to where you need to be.
I mean, the film is basically a historical sports comedy, also featuring, several cavemen, as we also pointed out in the beginning. How did you figure out which musical style, or more importantly, which instruments would fit best or would be most appropriate for the picture?
With the really trial and error, but we spent a lot of time in the beginning. I say a lot of time. I just told you it was all very quick. But as I said, we had a week or 2 weeks where we were messing around with sounds and ideas. And we tried, for instance, Doug, the main character, we had a theme for him fairly quickly, or an idea, which was sketched out on piano. And then it was, well, what is going to work for this character? So then we tried it on lots and lots of different things, and that involved even having, we booked a session with a double bass player to come in and play this melody, which really was in the kind of mid-range on the piano. So hard work for a double bass player to kind of, work through it. So it sounded a little bit clunky, but in a good way. And, we tried that to see if that could make make it sound a little bit different, because it was a bit tough to play even for somebody who was very good. And then we tried it on sort of Turkish kumbus and all kinds of different things. But really how the film, the score developed and worked was that there's a kind of prologue at the beginning, which is almost like its own little story. So that was kind of sounded like an old school kind of Harry Hansen type film, and then from that point on, the score really was quite small in scale, with the instrumentation to sort of reflect the tribe who you'd see. They were quite simple, sort of good-natured people, but also there weren't actually that many of them, so it didn't make sense to have a huge sound to overwhelm them. And then once the kind of the Bronze Age kind of came into the movie and the score started moving forward, we were able to introduce more and more of the orchestra, and then really the final act is pretty much all orchestra, still having some of these sounds within it, but the score sort of builds up to the final moments, really, to which is the final game of this soccer match that you just mentioned.
Did you and Harry work from his studio at Wavecrest in Los Angeles, or were you working from separate studios?
Well, Harry, I have a studio around the corner from Harry's, so we are only 5 minutes apart.
Oh, okay.
In Santa Monica, and so it's very easy for him to pop over here or for me to pop over there. Harry also does have another rig at his, which I can be on if I wanted to be or something, But the most of what we did was me being here. Us meeting generally at his and doing a Skype, occasionally at mine, and then talk about things and take a meeting, and then we would go away and work in our different spaces. And then if it was a question of passing something back and forth, we'd have the huge technological nightmare of saving sequences cross-platform, because I was working in Logic and he was working in Cubase. And then getting to open up at each end, which is possible, because we just did it, but it's not easy. And so that was interesting.
And then you recorded the score in London at Abbey Road.
That's right, yeah.
Did you record entire 2D sessions, or were some pieces recorded in separate individual sessions?
Well, we did 2 days of percussion,
Mm-hmm.
and then we did a separate timpani session, and then we broke the sessions down, so we did strings and woodwinds together.
Okay.
And then we did brass in the evenings, and then we had a choir session at the end as well. So it was all then, because some of the sounds that we had made and decided upon in this first 2 weeks, they obviously remained in the score. So, I'd hit a few things here at mine that I'd recorded, and, certain sort of things like banjo that I've played and things like that. And those stayed within the score. So the score is then obviously built back up with some samples and the orchestra sessions and various different things from different places. We also did a percussion day here in LA as well, and so yeah, we had a lot of different sounds coming from different places.
Did you have to adjust your music several times due to multiple re-edits of the picture?
Yes. I mean, the thing on a stop motion takes a long time to make, and they film about 1.5 seconds a day, which they might then have 8 stages or something when they're really going full on in production, but you're still only talking maybe 12-15 seconds a day of footage. So if they get notes back from the studio or whoever saying you need to change this, it's not something they can just find another cut of and then insert it in. It takes a long time. So we even towards the end of the project, you can find you're doing a scene and it cuts to what is then a storyboard because they've had a note they've got to change something, and they've got people frantically busy kind of making footage. But invariably then what is the storyboard usually then grows in size, and so they what you did is too short. It's much better the other way around when everything you've done is too long, but in this case it wasn't that. It was usually needed to be extended, and so yeah, the picture changed constantly. And even 2 days before we were going to score, we'd sent stuff off to be copied and things were still changing, so it's very challenging from a technical standpoint, that as well, just in terms of keeping on top of updates on the cut and what have you. But that's very, very normal, obviously, for a movie. I remember working on a couple of things out here where the cut would change every 2 days, and when you're on it for 10 weeks, that's a lot of different picture turnovers.
Yes, that's probably pretty common, and it can also be very frustrating, especially when you're working on the music, because you're so much relying on timing, of course, because the music has to match the picture to the 100th of a second, and if there are constant re-edits, it can be a nightmare scenario, I believe.
No, I mean, it can be for sure, and sometimes, hopefully when you get the new picture, it's a relatively gentle shot, but there are times when you've written something that works and has even been approved, and then you get the picture back, and what you did yesterday, the bit at the start's now in the middle and the bit at the end's
yes.
And then fundamentally your piece just doesn't work, and so you have to basically go again, and that is it's part of the job, but it is a can be a frustrating thing.
When you look at the album, I think there's about 55 minutes of score, which is pretty good, actually. Did you have to toss out several ideas which did not even make it into the film, or let alone the album?
Yes, to both, actually. So we did. The same on. I know sometimes people release every cue, don't they, on the that they've done in the movie. We didn't do that, and I didn't do that on. I haven't done that before either. I tend to just try and make the soundtrack something that's not, a good listening experience. But the answer is yes to both. Basically, there were cues that we had in the movie that then didn't make it, and then we still have those. And also there were cues that were finished on the movie that then didn't end up. They were in the movie but aren't on the soundtrack. So I sometimes see people on YouTube somehow find those and put them up, but I don't know where I assume they ripped them off the film. But yeah,
probably yes.
The soundtrack is hopefully a highlights of from the movie.
There is lots of stuff on YouTube which I have no idea how people find the material or what their sources are. I have no clue.
That's it. There's lots of wonderful, weird things on YouTube.
Wonderful and weird, yeah, both. Tom, what's actually next for you? What are you currently working on?
Well, I'm doing a couple of things actually. I'm doing Shaun the Sheep 2,
Yeah.
which is called Farmageddon, which is obviously another Aardman movie, and I'm meant to be scoring that in April, so I think it gets released in end of the summer. But that's obviously it's stop motion again, so that's the picture's changing constantly and all the rest of it. But we have a screening of that in January, which I'm going to fly over to England and see how that goes down, and then tweak the score accordingly. And then I'm also on I'm doing another co-write with Harry actually on a TV series for ABC Warner Brothers, which is called Whiskey Cavalier, and it's sort of like Mission Impossible meets sort of James Bond really, with kind of one person from the CIA and one person from the FBI and that kind of thing, sort of solving different missions in different European cities. So we've seen the first 4 episodes and that looks really good. So the first comes out I think at the end of February. So working our way through that as well.
Tom, do you have anything else to add? Do you wish to comment any further on your recent projects or an early man? Or is there anything else on your mind?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think, as I said, just excited to be part of Early Man, really. And I think as I said, I think that filming time of a second and a half, the love that goes into it, I think for it to get 7 Annie nominations for, lots of different things, including directing, I think is deserved, because I think that these guys are on it for 5 years,
Yeah.
piecing this thing together, and it really is incredible how they do it, and I think it just looks absolutely fantastic, and I was just really pleased to be part of it.
Tom, I would like to thank you for taking so much time out of your schedule. I had a great time talking to you. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
I did. Thank you very